Hey, it's Soul, and today is just going to be a bunch of B-roll. Don't worry too much about watching anything, just listen up. In this video slash audio, I want to follow up on my reactions to Conduits, the one system in Shadowlands that, since hearing about it back during BlizzCon, it's been my one worry that has persisted up until I started taking the notes that would make up this recording. I'm going to assume that you have a decent familiarity with what soulbinds and conduits are at this point, so well, I at least better add some context first. The other day, during my weekly, I gave my feedback on soulbinds and conduits as I saw them. I just saw them as a selection of super talents that I can customize, and then when I'm out on the field, I can swap depending on the situation. Seeing soulbinds and conduits this way is a narrow perspective that many, maybe most of us WoW players are used to seeing. We're suckers for familiarity, whether we see it or do some mental gymnastics to pretend that it's there. But anyway, when I gave feedback, I shared the sentiment that many had. I want to be able to swap conduits with greater freedom. I suggested a system similar to the Warlords of Draenor glyph system, or more recently with essences. In my suggestion, when you get conduits, they're permanent, and you can tailor your character just the way you want to, whenever you want to, so long as you have these conduits unlocked. That about summed up my concerns and suggestions for making conduits, quote, better. Just earlier though, Belluar released a video with a snippet of his interview with Ian Hazzikostas explaining the philosophy behind soulbinds that, for me, was pretty eye-opening. My whole view on soulbinds being like talent was very much not the way that Blizzard views them. I'm going to provide a link to the Wowhead article that summarizes Ian's response, but I do advise at least listening to the full quote in Belluar's interview because that's better than bullet points. A link to that is going to be in the description too. So in Ian's response to Belluar, who asked why can't conduits be like a glyph system, is that they didn't want players to manage massive inventories of conduits to swap in and out, much like how during BFA we swapped out different Azerite gear sets, or corruption sets, or whatever combination of sets to suit our needs. This wasn't the best argument to make, in my opinion, and it's actually not relevant. It won't be surprising to see some critics take this bait and use this as an argumentative wedge, like the sole reason to make soulbinds and conduits flexible, malleable, and simmable. The bigger, the massively more important piece comes from the team's philosophical question of choice. We're well accustomed to equating choice with agency or optimization. Swapping gear and gems, essences, corrupted gear, Azerite traits, talents, relics, and all the etceteras. But accessing those series of choices is a journey that involves the typical farming and grinding away so we can get the pieces that we need, and then we can start optimizing, customizing, and all that jazz. In Shadowlands, some of these familiar systems will remain, and we will be able to swap out soulbinds with relative ease, so we'll still have that freedom to min-max, optimize, and so on. However, inside soulbinds, inside conduits, is a different philosophy that will challenge our typical perspective of World of Warcraft, and that's thanks to the notion that conduit placement can't be undone, and that replacing them means destroying the old conduits. Yes, we can theoretically swap out conduits if we continuously farm them out and consume them as if they were potions, flasks, or food. And in the most extreme situations, some players will farm out conduits because World First is on the line, and the conduit loadout between Mythic Bosses 3 and 4, it might make all the difference. We're already hearing from WoW's more vocal and prolific players about extremes the hardcore players will go through, like not choosing a covenant before pre-raid hotfixes come in, or at least decide a covenant entirely based on the upcoming raid encounter previews. We're going to hear the anti-Ian rant, we're going to hear the Blizzard repeating history rant, and so on. Specifically, we'll hear many players, hardcore or otherwise, go on about the lack of customization conduits and soulbinds provide because they can't change stuff on the fly. If positivity is infectious, frustration spreads like wildfire, and critics will most likely control the narrative, and many fans will buy into the idea that the majority want this. I'm not speaking for anybody, I'm just less certain. So here's what I think so far, and don't mistake this as a defense of conduits, this is just my interpretation. The philosophy behind conduits is an unprecedented challenge from Blizzard to its players. Like, here's a hybrid system of choice and optimization. Here is your opportunity to define your character based on you, the player. Like if you're a pure DPS, a tank, a healer, or a role hybrid. If you're a single target or an AoE specialist, a supporter who provides these soulbind buffs, or a world questing machine. The swappability of soulbinds let you switch between a few of these profiles or to maximize a single role to its fullest. A Mythic Plus Pro might use all 3 soulbinds to tackle different dungeons or fixes. But the greater challenge Blizzard is posing to players is that, logistically, it's nearly impossible for conduits to be flexible enough to be the next thing that you just adjust every time you jump into something new. When you progress from one boss to the next, or one dungeon after another, or if you accept that queue into a battleground while you're questing, your soulbinds likely will not be 100% optimized because conduits aren't a system designed to be adapted for every single situation on the fly. That is going to sting. Because so much of the culture of WoW is about optimization and the need for control, and then taking that culture and forcing it on everyone. Because you must be at your best, because if not, I will bring someone else who is. We've seen this clash before with Titan Forging, and the impossible hill to climb for that perfect item level. With conduits, optimization comes at a cost, which leaves the player's psyche with 2 choices: to either endlessly farm consumables or conduits to maintain your ability to optimize, or to make these hard choices that define your character's identity. Or to quit, you clever comment person you. Quick reality check though, everything that we're used to is, it's still going to be in place. We still have gear, trinkets, talents, gems, and enchants. There are already a lot of goals that our characters have when it comes to optimizing to that perfect calculation. Conduits are a different beast, and I can say with confidence that the inevitable statements or comments that say, well, conduits are basically this or that, are wrong. We haven't seen this before. The frustration of Titan Forging was chance. The frustration of conduits will be choice. Conduits are 1 part optimization, and 3 parts choice. As they are right now, soulbinds and conduits can make our characters whatever we want them to be, but not whenever we want them to be. Regardless of my eyes being open, there's still smack to talk about conduits that go beyond the hardcore mentality. Off the top of my head though, I can guess what the almost comically hardcore are no doubt planning, like multiple characters of different class, covenant, and conduit specializations so they can swap characters on the fly, and have a conduit profile ready for that one upcoming boss. Another extreme, I mentioned several times already, the endless farming of conduits to make yourself ready for every situation. What soulbinds will do for many players at first, I presume, will be to confuse them. New temporary systems tend to do that, but that's a different discussion that I've shared my thoughts on numerous times. Anyway, I bet that there will be many situations where players fill their soulbinds with conduits only to regret that choice because they went too heavy into one style of play that they care about without thinking of the others. That's why I think it's very important, and also a good thing, that soulbinds aren't immediately fully accessible to give us room to make those sorts of mistakes. The most legit concern of mine would be the inevitable moment when player X is committed to their gameplay preferences at least for a while, but then suddenly want to change things up. That's going to be pretty darn disruptive, and unless they hoarded all the conduits that dropped and let sit in their bags, going through that journey to rebuild 1 or more of their soulbinds is going to be frustrating. But to be fair, is this new? It'll probably feel similar to having to get another set of Azerite gear, or a set of weapons and trinkets, or different essences, or an entirely new set of gear, for those of us who remember the days when armored main stats changed with specialization. Now how about me? How am I going to approach conduits? Let me describe myself as a player. I main a Protection Paladin, I raid at a heroic level, and I'm going to consider trying Mythic Plus again in Shadowlands. During progression, I'm going to occasionally run battlegrounds, and whenever I do, I typically hold positions or run flags. But later, in a given season, after progression is done, I sometimes heal for fun, to change things up and to preserve my sanity. So what am I going to do? Depending on the covenant that I choose, I'm going to decide that one soulbind will definitely be for progression, whether that makes me take the least damage or provides the best raid utility. Another soulbind will be more offensive, and I'll probably use this for outdoor questing, PvP, or farm content during raids. The last one I'm not sure yet. It might be a little bit of both. Maybe an oddball build of self-healing or something. Frankly, it's hard to say, because at the moment, Paladin conduits haven't been previewed. But at some point, one of my soulbinds will be readjusted to help with healing. Heck, I might end up healing Mythic Plus dungeons, and that itself will be my third soulbind. One other thing to note about conduits is that there will be many spec-specific conduits which would effectively lock a given soulbind to a specialization. However, there will also be non-spec specific conduits that focus on your class-wide abilities, giving us more flexibility that might not be 100% optimal, but at least in this approach, soulbinds can be 100% viable. I can foresee myself initially wanting to target conduits to fill out my soulbinds for the first time, so as a point of feedback, I think that at the start, Blizzard ought to make it rain, right? With basic conduits as we develop our soulbinds, since like I said earlier, they won't be fully unlocked in the first days or even weeks of Shadowlands. I could also foresee bags full of conduits whether we like it or not. Here's why. We've already been informed that conduits are on a separate bonus loot table that won't get in the way of dungeon or raid drops, and that's good. But because conduits are a series of both class-specific and spec-specific benefits, and we don't know if there will be trade restrictions in groups, I urge Blizzard to consider the following suggestions. Make conduits freely tradable between players, like don't even make them soulbind. And this will create a conduit market. After all, these are consumables, right? Maybe let the market decide just how much optimization is important to them. But if not freely tradable between players, I think that there can be a way maybe to grind up unwanted conduits into a currency that lets us target conduits that we actually need or want multiples of. I get that this could produce some really strange behavior, like farming the most efficient source of conduits for currency instead of actually farming for the conduits themselves, but that's the general direction that I'm thinking of. These suggestions sound like the opposite of what Blizzard is trying to do, which is to make our conduit choices feel meaningful. But we're still playing a video game, where we will undoubtedly be farming the same content over and over again, so we can get that damn trinket that never drops. And I keep coming away with more and more of these conduits that could just be vendored or traded to someone who needed it, but I just think that more can be done to make conduits still mean something after we've filled out our soulbinds. Letting them waste away in our bags in case of a rainy day works, but it doesn't sound ideal. So let's wrap this up. As a player, as in just me, not trying to push this on you, but I don't see much of an issue with conduits. I know that I'm going to slot what I think is cool as it drops, and I'll consider farming specific content for that one conduit that I really want. I think it's cool, but typically that's not my thing. I don't let loot control what I do. As you might have noticed, I'm just not your typical player. As a self-styled pundit for the World of Warcraft though, I can see plenty of people having an existential crisis over the notion that Blizzard will only let you optimize to a certain extent on a given character. I said this earlier, that the critics will be loud about it, and they will influence those who are a part of, or who want to be a part of that culture. And yet, I can still see more players just accepting that conduits really are like a character profile, that people can customize to make their characters their own. I don't know if I explained my thoughts on conduits very well, because I'm kind of fighting against my usual perceptions too. But I've got to say, Blizzard's being really brave, I guess, to double down with this approach of roleplay interfering with optimization, knowing that they're going to be pushed back really hard. So these are just my thoughts right now, and not my conclusions. There's a lot more testing left to do and more feedback to give, so I encourage you, as always, to share your likes, your concerns, and your frustrations in a comment below. I'm looking forward for more coverage here on the channel, but until then, stay safe, stay healthy, and stay breezy.